Hello, welcome to my banking application Capstone project. My name is Jesse George. This is the first of 3 videos. In this video, we'll go over the application diagram, the front-end architecture, and authentication. This is my application diagram. There are several parts to the diagram. The front end is what is rendered for the user and allows them to request or update information in the database. Index.js holds all the API endpoints. The DAL is where all the functions needed to communicate with the database are stored. The database is where all the user data is stored. The user makes a request using the front-end UI. The front end then makes a call to the API endpoint in index.js needed to carry out that request. The API endpoint then calls the function in the DAL that's needed to communicate with the database. Once the request is completed, the database responds back to the DAL with the data or result. The DAL then responds back to the API endpoint, and then the API endpoint responds back to the front end so it can re-render the result to the user. I chose to use the standalone starter files, so my application doesn't use a framework like Next.js or Remix. My application has a component-based architecture and is a JavaScript library. It uses React Router DOM for routing and use context for global state. The UI design has a simple nav bar at the top with a card displaying either information for the user or a form for user input. The application utilizes Bootstrap styling for the navbar, cards, and buttons. It also uses Bootstrap JavaScript for the navbar toggler button. Next, I will discuss the types of authentication used in my application. To log in, you must supply an email and password. This is then encoded with the encode URI component. Then the front end uses fetch to trigger that API input, passing both the email and password as a parameter. Then the API calls the DAL function to find the user by email. If the user is not found, a response is sent back to the user that the email is not found. If the user is found, then the password is decoded and a hash is created to compare to the user's previously hashed password in the database. Only if the 2 hashes match is the user authenticated. The biggest issue I had was when using special characters. For instance, if you use a question mark in your password, it would be considered the beginning of a query string and wouldn't properly authenticate. To overcome this, I needed to implement encode URI component